Good morning, aspirants. Welcome to SAMEEKSHA series. As you know, this is context extraction for the mains from the Hindu newspaper. Right now, let me quickly enter into today's newspaper, that is 22nd September 2022. Again, I am repeating, this is for mains, how we have to extract content for the Hindu, what to remember, what not to, what we can leave in the Hindu. So this is what the series is all about. Let me enter into first thing first into this aspect of Samiksha. So this is today's Hindu. The Hindu of 22nd September, that is Thursday. I have taken the edition of Vishakhapattanam. Right. So let's quickly discuss what are the important components for today's general studies from this paper. Just like yesterday, again today, the first 4 pages of the Hindu or 5 pages of the Hindu is of advertisements. So leave it. First thing first, the important article is Putin mobilizes more troops, says nuclear threat is not a bluff. Nuclear threat is not a bluff, something which is ironical to happen at this state of world affairs, because the world is reeling under huge crisis. Right, yesterday we have seen now Putin is escalating his war. He is mobilizing more troops. Right, as a result, he is calling up of introducing of more than 3 lakh reserve police force or reserve army personnel to enter into Ukraine to escalate the war. So this is something that you can write. This is something that we have to know about what are the things, global issues that are going in and around us. So this is first thing. Please remember that you can use for international relations students. Realism is taking over the so-called idealism these days. Now, in reaction to this, Joe Biden has reacted to this, that he is becoming reckless. That is, Putin is becoming reckless. As a result, he is using these powers. Now, there is one nuclear power plant here, Zaporozhye. Zaporozhye. Now, they might ask this question in prelims. Zaporozhye nuclear plant is in news. Where it is located? It is located in the so-called Ukraine. If you look at this map of Ukraine, you'll find Zaporozhye here. Right. Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is presented in the so-called Ukraine, and there are some areas like Donbas, DONBAS, that is also here. Crimea was annexed by Ukraine. Uh, Crimea was annexed by Russia in 2014. As a result, Russia was kept under sanctions since that day. Since they have annexed the so-called Crimea, since that day they have kept Russia under sanctions. So this is something that you have to understand. After this, look at Black Sea. Right, this is the Black Sea where, because of the war, the Black Sea trade was stopped. As a result, the reserves of grain which was present in Ukraine is known as the reservoir of the so-called food grains in the world. Hence, because of this Black Sea blockage, movement was not happening. As a result, the world is suffering under huge food grain crisis. So these are the things that you have to remember. Zaporozhye is located in Ukraine. Donbas is located in Ukraine. Crimea was annexed by Russia way back in 2014. As a result, the Western world has kept Russia under sanctions. Right, and Black Sea trade was stopped because Ukraine is having the storage of all the food grains that were in Europe in Ukraine. As a result, because of the stop of this, the war, uh, because of this war, food grain crisis is happening. These are the things. That is the only aspect that we have to remember here. Less of the things not that important, right? This was followed by the regional news. Regional news is not also that important here. This is followed by the so-called the South Indian news. This is followed by the South Indian news. Now, one thing that we have to understand is Karnataka legislature has passed the so-called anti-conversion bill. Just remember which uh, state has passed it. Karnataka has passed this anti-conversion bill. The official name of the bill is Right to Freedom of Religion Bill, popularly called as anti-conversion bill. Just remember, this was passed by Karnataka. Now, earlier Karnataka government has passed ordinance. It has asked the governor of Karnataka to pass ordinance under Article 213 of Indian Constitution to make this as a bill. Now they have passed it uh, as a act itself, right? So this is something like why they have passed an ordinance earlier, because in the Legislative Council of Karnataka they were not having majority. Now they gained the majority. As a result, they have passed this bill, right? So it is Congress leaders are saying that it is unconstitutional. Right to religious freedom is freedom that is exercised by the citizens. They can convert into any religion that they want. However, it has to be noted that the fundamental rights doesn't include that is called right to convert one person into other person. If you are willingly ready to convert, that is your wish, but no authority has to ask you to convert into other religion. So this is what defended by BJP. So this is something that you can write in the so-called Indian society. You can write in Indian secularism context also. Further moving on, let's look at the editorials. Now, the ambit of fraternity and the wages of the oblivion. This was written by the former Vice President of India, Mr. Hamid Ansari. Now, what he is saying that the ambit of fraternity, which is mentioned in the so-called preamble of Indian Constitution, it is being misutilized or it is not standing to the times. So this is something article which is criticizing on the so-called present dispensation about the so-called fraternity the system. But what I do say is it has not much relevance, right? So you can formidably leave it. Now, dangerous movement. Now this editorial is about dangerous movement. This is something which is about the so-called Putin's escalation. Now, what the editorial is saying that the recent move that Putin has announced to increase the number of personnel in the so-called Ukraine to 3 lakhs, it indicates that he is getting some setbacks in Ukraine. Obviously, uh, what it is saying is if you are going to the war, you cannot expect the result as you want, right? So war is irrational is again proved by the so-called the setbacks that Putin is getting in the so-called Ukraine. Way back in 1980s, Russia has got, at that time it was USSR, it has got setbacks from Afghanistan. Within next 7 years or 8 years, USSR was disintegrated. So following the Afghanistan exist. So similarly, now he has entered into Ukraine. Now there is no exit route because he is having many uh, challenges in this war. So initially he has started this with a special military operation, but this couldn't achieve the objectives. What are the objectives that he has thought? The objectives that he has thought is to ensure that he is going to uh, limit the NATO's expansion towards the so-called Russia's far west. Right. This is what his initial thought is. Now, how Ukraine could resist this? Ukraine was getting military support and economic support from the West and the US. Right. This is how Ukraine was opposing this move made by the. So, as a result, the invasion of Russian invasion has become costly for Russians. So, what were the declared objectives of Russia when it was entering into the so-called Ukraine? Putin said that Ukraine's demilitarization is our objective. However, this objective of demilitarization is not happening because USA and Europe are sending their weapons into Ukraine for this war. So rather than demilitarization, they are escalating the military tensions, and this is quite clear when Putin has said that nuclear power option is quite open and we are not going to create a bluff, which means rather than demilitarization, military is being expanded, and today 3 lakh military personnel going again inside this is again not something called demilitarization operation. At the same time, it has reinvigorated the so-called NATO forces. Why it has regenerated or reinvigorated this NATO is recently NATO was expanded by including Finland and Sweden into its ambit. Earlier, Finland and Sweden were not members of NATO. Now they are talking or they are taking this Finland and Sweden into NATO. Now this is something that Putin cannot digest because he wanted NATO not to be present in the vicinities of the so-called Russia. But by looking at the Russian aggression, these two countries, particularly Finland and Sweden, they thought to join the so-called NATO. Again, one setback for this member. What is important here? What are the NATO members? That can be important for prelims. Next, faced with these setbacks, sanctions and geopolitical challenges, right? He can well say that Putin is facing some challenges, right? What are the geopolitical challenges? In the SCO summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that this is not the time for war. This is the time for discussion and debate, not for war. So this is, which means he is facing sanctions and he is seeing some setbacks in the so-called geopolitical domain also. So, however, if he is escalating the war, it is going to escalate further war and it is going to enter into a dangerous phase. That is why it has said that dangerous movement has occurred in the uh, Ukraine-Russia war, not only dangerous for this state, but dangerous for the country or for the world as a whole. Why it is dangerous for the world as a whole? As I said, the grains were stuck in the so-called Ukraine. The world is suffering from huge food crisis or food inflation, right? 8 billion population or 8.5 billion population of the world is reeling under food crisis. At the same time, Europe is suffering from gas prices, and the rest of the world is suffering from the so-called oil crisis. So because of this war, all these things are happening in across all the continents. As a result, it is very better to stop this war at the earliest. Now, this editorial is about the so-called trade tactics. This is in response to the so-called yesterday's uh, Ministry of Commerce, the minister, that is called Piyush Goyal's response to the media that Indian government, though many countries are asking India to have bilateral FTAs with them, Indian government is not ready. Now, what the article speaks about is Indian government is trying to come out with a new foreign trade policy. The old foreign trade policy that we had was implemented way back in 2015 for the 5 years. That is from 2015 to 2020. The first foreign trade policy under Narendra Modi's government was conducted, or it was introduced. However, because of COVID-19, it was extended further 1 year. That is until 2021. Now this is 2022 September. Why they have dragged the thing so far, no one is understanding. So the article is saying the same thing. So the first one is India's new foreign trade policy is going to come, but the time at which it is coming, September or October 2022, this is something in the middle of the financial year. Everyone expects something called a new foreign trade policy to be aligned with the so-called financial year, so that the companies who are going to export or import, who are taking part in this export and import, will be having a clear vision on what the government policy is, what are the things that we have to do. But introduction of this type of important trade policies during the middle of the year is something which cannot be questioned, or which cannot be logically proved. Now, the author, or this is also saying that Indian exports are bounding back, are rising back. After COVID-19, our exports are rising. However, in the last 2 months, during July and August and September, particularly July, August, the exports have come down, but the imports bill was raised to a maximum extent. Now, in this context, India is going to have a new foreign trade policy. We have to watch and wait and watch how foreign trade policies are going to work. So, what are the important things here? uh, what are the things that we have to understand here is the crux of this is simple. India is going to have a new foreign trade policy. Let's wait and watch what are the things that it will have in the coming days. The second one is with what countries we have foreign trade policies or FTAs, that I have discussed in yesterday's current affairs itself. Please go through it. Right, there are 13 FTAs and 6 PTAs with the government with other countries. What are those? Very important for this prelims. Third one is introducing this FTA in the middle of the year is something which is lacking rationality. And the fourth thing is when the exports are bouncing back, introduction of a new foreign policy doesn't seem to be quite well, right? So these are the things that the author is saying. Apart from this, he is also saying that there are some inherent challenges that the exporters are facing. We have to target on them. For example, whatever the remission duties that commission government has given for the exports, it has to be taken away. So that is what it is saying. Duty remission scheme has to be taken away for certain schemes or for certain products. This is the thing. And the recession is under threat in Europe and US. right? So order books are still full for the exporting companies, but still uh, the buyers are deferring to buy, which means exports are facing some problem today. Hence, what it is saying is, let's wait, or the government should give some buffer against the so-called increasing interest rates and concerns of the industry. So this has to be focused on rather than coming with a new foreign policy at this point of time. This is what new foreign trade policy at this point of time. This is what the crux is. A risky new status quo. Now this is about the so-called India-China's relations along a line of actual control. Just remember one thing: India and China are in standoff in the parts of Ladakh. China has intruded into Ladakh way back in 2020, mid 2020. Still, that point of time, they are maintaining status quo. As a result, this is becoming a risky business between the ties of India and China. This is what the author is saying. No need to go into technicalities. Yesterday, I said that the Army Navy Chief of India has said that Chinese continuous presence in the maritime is existing from 2008. Now, this is Chinese presence in the land border also. So, in the internal security front or in international relations, every year, not every year, see, in no year they have asked about India China domain as far as internal security aspect is considered, but you can use this context when you are writing India's security in the maritime borders, in the land borders, right? In the maritime borders, Chinese presence ring up pulse. In the land borders, intrusion into the so-called Ladakh, intrusion into the so-called Arunachal Pradesh, you can write those things. The failure of fire safety norms recently in Secunderabad area, right? Two buildings were on fire because of some fire accidents that has happened inside the building. Now, what is the crux of this? The accident has brought on illegal building structures in Secunderabad. No one is following the norms. So where you can use this? You can use this in urbanization and how urban cities are not following the urban areas are not following the rules. You can use that in that context. So you can use that in this context. The failure of safety norms can be used in that domain. Let's look at what are the problems that cities are facing in India. Yesterday we have seen that Bengaluru floods have increased recently. This is because of encroachment into the so-called the natural flow of the rivers and lakes. Now the second problem with our Indian cities is this illegal constructions here and there where they are happening recently, right? Now let me move on further. Bihar is free from Naxal presence, and the fight against Naxalism is in the last stages in the so-called Jharkhand, says CRPF chief. How it can be related? It can be related to the so-called internal security aspect again. In the internal security aspect, we used to study about yesterday we have seen about the so-called how insurgency is coming down in the northeastern region of our country, in the Jammu and Kashmir, how developmental activities are taking place, and now this is about Maoism. All these are linked with internal security. First chapter, linkages between development and spread of extremism. Bihar is free from Naxal presence. The fight is in the last stage in the so-called in the other areas. This is what they are seeing. No. Bihar free of Naxal presence. The fight is in the last stages. Now here there are some things that we have to remember. That is operations such as Octopus. One second. So Operation Octopus, Operation Double Bull, Operation Thunderstorm, Operation Chakrabandha. So these are the operations that the central CRPF has done in order to have or in order to mitigate the so-called Maoism in India. So remember the operations: Operations Octopus, Operations Double Bull, Operation Thunderstorm, Operation Chakrabandha. Double Bull, Octopus, Thunderstorm, and Chakrabandha, and it led to the arrest of 592 Maoists, and this led to the so-called the diminishing of the Maoist presence. Now, the number of districts under Maoist violence stood at 39. Earlier, it was 60 in 2010. So, from 60, we have come down to 39. Remember this term from 2010 to 2021. This is how we have come to the, and 90% of violence incidents has come down in the so-called the northeastern, in the so-called Maoist areas of the country. This is something substantial achievement that our armed forces have got. This is something which has to be lauded. So where you can use this every year, they are asking one question on Naxalism or Maoism. So these things can be important. Remember two things. What is CRPF chase that Naxal presence is coming down in India? It has come down to the number called 39 from 60. That is first thing that you have to remember, and remember the so-called operations Octopus, Thunderstorm, Double Bull, and then Chakrabandha. Now, the Home Ministry is also providing them 4,000 crores to purchase the latest weapons and equipments. This is how central government is very serious about these type of operations. Right? They have allotted 4,000 crores. Now you can write this again. Government is showing a spine to go ahead these forces. Now, Ministry of India, Indian government has clearly said that we have zero tolerance towards terrorism or left-wing extremism. So based on this, we can write, as Government of India has said very clearly that we have zero tolerance towards these two things called terrorism and Maoism. So we are not going to spare it. As a result, central government support is very vital in this, and central government is extending its support in the form of 4,000 crore rupees to purchase defense equipments. And permanent camps, for the first time, permanent camps were also established in the Maoist areas by these armed forces. This means with a combination of developmental reforms as well as law and order reforms, we are bringing back the so-called Naxal hit areas into the mainstream India. Now, Ratan Tata and K.T. Thomas. K.T. Thomas was the Supreme Court judge. They were the trustees of PM Cares. So this where you can use PM Cares was launched as a parallel donation camp to the so-called Pradhana Mantri uh, PM Relief Fund, Prime Minister's National Relief Fund. Apart from that, you have PM Cares. So here the trustees were Ratan Tata and KT Thomas. Just to include the so-called transparency in this PM Cares, they have launched this. Right? You can just remember that in the so-called uh, transparency of government. Now coming to this, the Election Commission of India said that BJP has spent 340 crores in 2002 election campaigns. At the same time, Congress has spent 195 crores in this 1 year. So in 2022, whatever the elections have happened across the country, BJP have spent 340 crores, where Congress has spent 194 crores. Now, where you can use this about the money power in the so-called politics, how money is dominating in the politics. This can be used as an example, right? Now, will EWS quota cut share of pie? Those competing on merit, asks Chief Justice of India. Now, what it is saying is, yesterday, the Attorney General of India, Mr. Venugopal, have answered to the Supreme Court saying that the extra 10% reservation, whatever is accorded to the so-called EWS, it is taken outside this 50, that is in the rest of the 50, and they have encroached from 50 to 60. Now what Supreme Court asked is, if you are encroaching into that the rest of the 50%, won't it limit the size of the so-called competition, or won't it limit the so-called merit based competition? Because earlier the merit people or the so-called general category people used to have 50%, now you have reduced it to 40. How will it is going to compromise the meritorious students candidate chances? This is what the Supreme Court dealing. Let's not bother about the day by day commentaries. Let us wait for the Supreme Court's result, and then on that day we can discuss what are the various things that are involved in this 103rd constitutional amendment bill, that is EWS reservations. Going further, DGCA extends flight capacity restrictions on SpiceJet. Directorate General of Civil Aviation has recently said that we are extending the restrictions that we kept on SpiceJet. What is the restriction? They have restricted that inside the full flight, 50% of the capacity is the maximum number that they can allow. Why they have kept this? This SpiceJet is not following the so-called safety norms, and their inability is costing them. Right, where you can use corporate governance, ethics in corporate governance. Now, they are unable to pay for their maintenance. As a result, the DGCA has kept these restrictions. So, this you can use in corporate governance. Next one is Supreme Court condemns hate speech aired on television. Now, this is something like the role of media in creating challenges to internal security. Supreme Court clearly said that there is increasing hate speech in the TV debates, right? And why central government is silent on it. So it is asking the central government to respond on this, right? Now, the former Chief Justice of India, S.A. Bobde, he has said that arresting hate crime or hate speech on TV is essential to maintain law and order. This is what you can use about the so-called role of media in creating challenges to internal security. Just remember, Supreme Court condemns hate speech aired on TV, right? Social media, there you can use media and social media. Election Commission proposes doing away with the postal ballot system for post-poll votes. Now again, a slew of economic reforms, Election Commission reforms are taking place. Now, postal ballot, there is one system called those government servants who are located in other parts of in some works, if they are unable to go back to exercise their voting, then they have this postal ballot system. Now, what Election Commission of India is thinking is, we have to do away with this postal ballot system, because there is chance for potential misuse of this postal ballot system. As a result, rather than having postal ballot system, let us go and establish voter facilitation center in that area. Say, for example, if some army personnel are present in the so-called Ladakh, if they are unable to go back for exercising their vote, let us go and establish one voter facilitation center in the Ladakh itself, so that they will go and they will vote. So this is what the new system is coming. So Election Commission reforms, let's look at this. Registered unrecognized political parties, 87 parties were removed by the so-called Election Commission of India. Election Commission of India has written to Law Ministry of India, saying that we should have we should limit the so-called cash donations to political parties to 2,000. Apart from 2,000, if you are going for extra, let's go through this on online media, online digital transactions. And this is third case in the last 1 week what Election Commission of India is proposing. So Election Commission of India is important. Every year they will ask one question. In this context, this question is very important. Moving further, there was a big boost to the so-called renewable energy sector in India. The government of India has allotted 19,500 crores for solar cell units in order to decrease the import of solar cells from the so-called China. Indian government has linked this solar unit cells under production linked incentive scheme, PLI scheme, that government of India has launched for certain industries or certain goods. Now, for 19,500 crores were allotted to these solar cells. Now, this incentivizes the domestic manufacturers to reduce their dependency on China's made panels. So, this is something which we can applaud. And again, this is a set of reforms that Government of India has taken in order to mitigate the so-called domestic imports. At the same time, this is also promoting alternative energy systems in the country, that is moving away from conventional sources to renewable energy sources. At international meet, a push for farmers' rights is happening. As we know this, the SEA Treaty, which is also known as the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. This is being conducted in India. We already discussed this in the current affairs section. International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture is being conducted in India. Now, what is the thing? The Minister of Agriculture, he is saying that we have to protect the farmer rights. WTO is keeping many restrictions on farmer rights in the form of banning the subsidies like the boxes, green box subsidies, white box subsidies, orange box subsidies. So Government of India is saying that we should not have these type of restrictions on the farmers. Again, we have, this is a repetitive thing, but one thing which is very important for this prelims, they might ask this SEA Treaty. Please look at our current affairs section where SEA Treaty was discussed into depth. This is something which is very crucial for current affairs. Next, moving further, in the world, what are the things that are happening? Putin has reckless regard for the so-called nuclear proliferation. This was the answer that Joe Biden has said to Russia's escalation in Ukraine. So no need to worry about this ball by ball commentary. Let's look at the wider aspect of the story when it is going to be present some way down the line. Now, first in more than a decade, Turkish president meets Israel prime minister. This is something where Turkey and Israel are coming together. Just remember, these are the happenings which are happening in West Asia. Turkey is coming close or started coming close to the so-called Israel. Earlier, Israel and Turkey were kept apart or they were maintaining distance, but for the first time in more than a decade, they have come forward, right? And the second one is regarding to the so-called South China Sea. US and Canada warships are sailing in the contested Taiwan Strait. This is something called provocation, unnecessary provocation of China in the region by the so-called US and Canada. Right. Again, remember, no need to analyze what are the things. Just remember that US and Canada are provoking the so-called China in the South China Sea by including into the so-called Taiwan Strait, and Turkey and Israel have been coming together. What is this importance? We study that when I take international relations module separately, right? Next, 8 killed as protests spread in Iran over Kurdish woman's death. As we know that Masha Amini, the 22-year-old girl, was killed in the so-called in her arrest by the so-called moral policing in Iran. As a result, there was some protest which was happening. In this protest, the government is suppressing its protest. As a result, 8 citizens were killed in this protest. Something which is ironic to happen in the so-called a conservative economy. Now, Wipro fights 300 for moonlighting with the firm's competitions. What is moonlighting? Moonlighting is having a second job at night times. Having a second job at night times is called moonlighting, where you can use, again, you can use this in corporate ethics. How you can use this in corporate ethics? In corporate ethics, we might be using it, right, when you are employed in a government service or in a private service. You should not do some other job apart from the job that you have been allotted. So there is no place for anyone who chooses to work with the rivals when they are working on Wipro. That is what Wipro's statement is. As a result, as they are working with 2 or more companies, we are removing them with immediate effect. This is a complete violation of integrity in its deepest form, where you can use this as an example of integrity in professional life, right? In ethics, there is one term called integrity, so you can directly take it. A complete violation of integrity in its deepest form, because you are working for a company and at the same time you are working with direct rivalry of that company. So this is something which is called against integrity. You can use this in corporate ethics. One example there you can take. That's the thing. There is one last one that recently the tennis legend Federer has said that I don't want to make my retirement day a very sad day. I want that day to be happy. So this is a farewell, not a funeral. That is what he has said. So I take the things up to some limits. I was not willing to risk it all. Right? What does this mean in life? Game is a part of life. Let us don't consider that I am moving away from my life. It is a game of, it is a part of my life, and I am taking a new course. So it is not all the things that I am leaving. So he is saying that I have much way or much life ahead. So this is something from the great man, because it is an indication for everyone that don't take anything too much to your heart. Accept everything as it comes. Do your work. Once that is done, realize your limits and then move on. Right. This is one best suggestion that Federer is saying. So with this, we'll come to the end of today's discussion. Hope you have enjoyed this discussion. Please subscribe to our channel. We'll be releasing every day Sameeksha in the coming days also. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.